Hello, Sid Roth here. Welcome to my world, where it's naturally supernatural. My guest has Viking ancestry. He is a man, a fighter. Well, he got hit with what is known as the baptism of love. And he became a lamb. And he says that when you combine the courage of a lion with the love of the lamb, you become a giant slayer. Are you ready to become, with the giants in your life, a giant slayer? I am. You know, it's hard to imagine your life the way you were. You were a quiet Baptist, Norwegian. I asked you a question the other day. I said, you've had so many supernatural experiences. What is the most supernatural experience you ever had? You didn't blink an eye. And you said, when I was immersed in the love of God. Tell me about it.
Yeah, it was a baptism of love is what I call it, where the liquid love went into the deepest cracks in my life, and the perfect love of God just took away the fear in my life. I've always been motivated, but I was motivated out of fear. It's something I had to do. I started then to receive His love, then become love, then now give love. So when I went, even as I started to travel into the Middle East and different places, I realized I have authority over what I love. I genuinely love these people, but the very love connected me to people, and then in the next moment, God started to surprise with signs, wonders, and miracles that gave such an openness that if I didn't have the love and I came in fear, it's like a dog that comes along. He can kind of smell if you are afraid. This was kind of how I operated before, because there was a root fear in my life, and as a result, the reaction I got even from some of the Muslim community. But now, when I had a perfect love and I started to love them with a perfect love, that perfect love started to change the atmosphere and take away fear. So it was not just that I was changed, the atmosphere around me started to change.
Would you be reaching so many Muslims in so many hot spots in the world if God hadn't shown him? And I love the way he says this. He now has the heart of a lamb, the heart of God's love, and the authority of the lion, and that proper mix causes him to become a giant slayer.
For a long time, I tried to learn to be a lion. I went out there and I tried to roar, but it didn't come from the lamb's heart. So when the very lamb's heart, and Jesus is both a lamb and a lion, and when I recognized that's what the love did, when I got that lamb's heart and I started to see people the way he was seeing them, feeling what he was feeling, then I started to say what he was saying. And when I roared, people started to gather instead of scatter because it came from the lamb's heart. Suddenly you started to see there was authority in it. The atmosphere is changing because the authority came from love. And God is love. And when that love comes in place, because he loves these people, he wants them free, he wants them healed, and he wants them delivered. And that's when that giant slayer comes in. Who is this giant that is trying to come against these people? Who is this giant that has crippled people with fear and in bondage? And that's when that comes from the lamb's nature, because it recognizes and feels that. Then the authority, and you're sensing that on the inside. It is time to roar. It's time to make a difference. It's time to speak to the giant instead of about the giant.
And I hear you talking about, obviously, you're taking the story of David and Goliath and applying it. How did God show you to put this together? I know you told me you were speaking for a school of students of the Spirit, and they started asking you how you could go to such dark places where it's so life-threatening, lead 1 million Muslims to know the Messiah. And you started teaching on David and Goliath.
Yeah, I realized that what these people were looking for was just an encounter. Like, what was the one encounter? And that is very important. But then as they looked at one of my videos, these students started to say, okay, we are interested now because we are all facing giants. We all need a breakthrough in our life. So we are interested in how did you do it? And I didn't even realize it was just the wisdom. As I started to say, the first thing I did, and it was kind of a humorous, and I started to describe. I showed up, and they all laughed. But then I realized, what area in your life is it that you are not showing up? If I hadn't taken the airline ticket, gone over there when there was a crisis, faced that giant, I would have never solved the giant. But then we started to talk, practically speaking, in their life, if that was finances or addiction, pornography, things that they were struggling with, what are some of those areas you didn't show up? And then I went into the second. What is the next battle that you are fighting that you show up for the right battle? So I kind of just started, practically speaking. But then I started to hear it was the most life transformational teaching they had heard. And I thought a lot of my kind of a petty messages where they had encounter and they laid on the floor, had the fire, had encounter, that was going to be the most transformational. Now, they say when you, instead of us watching you being a giant slayer, when you showed us how to be a giant slayer and dealing with the giants in our lives, in our family, in our community, that's what changed us. And now we have the tools on a daily basis so that we can wake up and face our giants, not just face them, but also to kill the giants. And that was my joy when I started to hear the stories of other giant slayers and their giants coming down and the testimonies that was being released. Yeah. That encouraged me to write and say, I want more people to experiencing this.
You know, when you say, I want to look at people the way Jesus looks at people, I believe you. I believe you're doing that. But you had a bit of a problem with this autistic kid who was drawing attention to himself. I mean, not intentionally. I mean, that, you know, it's a sad situation. And you're trying to give a talk in a large congregation. What happened?
And we had just been in Bangkok for 2 days, and through the whole teaching and worship, there was this yelling and screaming all throughout the event. And to be honest with you, it felt like the dove was leaving and pigeons was coming in. I started to sense this irritation.
And you felt things dropping on you. No,
yeah. So that's kind of how it felt. But then it was almost like, he says, Leif, when you're looking at that boy and looking at that mother, I want you to see him the way that I see him. And I want you to think about him the way I think. So in the middle of my own irritation, that still small voice whispered. And in the next moment, we were going to pray, and all these people came forward. He said, I felt the Holy Spirit say, I want you just to sit down. And I sat down, and I started to feel this mother taking the boy home at night. For all these years, the boy has not been able to talk to the mother. The boy looking into the mother's face, and then in the next moment starting to hit her. So this thing I just captured, and I started to feel. First of all, what Papa God feels, what happened to his girl and to his boy. But in the next moment, I started to feel this boy and the frustration, not being able to communicate, and the horrific things. And as I sat there, the boy started to fight himself through the mom's arm. This is in the front of everybody. And he started to crawl up on my lap. And he put his legs around me.
I happen to believe that love you were feeling went out of you like an arrow right into him.
I believe the same thing. And what happened even when you watch the boy, because when I just got both the video and the picture, but when the boy first starts, he first screams and hits, but then he starts to change. He starts to look me in the face. This is in the front of everybody in the room. And he starts to touch me. And he starts to look and he stares there. And that night, as I was saying, he sat for 1 hour and 40 minutes. So we're not talking about just a short moment, but the whole countenance of the boy changed. The whole nature of him changed. And then his face changed. And you could see it on his face. And then later on, that's when the mom came back that night, and it's hard for me not to cry, but the mom came back and says, my boy started to talk. So the boy that night started to talk to his mom for the first time, looking her into the eyes, and she had an encounter with a boy that had just had an encounter with Jesus and with the very love of Jesus. So I just started to say, Leif, sometimes you are like a lion and you want to speak authority to this, but sometimes you need to be just like a lamb, and the power of the lamb, of being a lay-down lover and just starting to feel what I feel and sense what I sense. There's power in the lamb, and there's power of the blood of the lamb. And I want you to learn sometimes, like, when to be a lamb and when to be a lion. And that's so much a key to be a giant slayer. It's just understanding the very rhythm of heaven. Because if not, sometimes when we roar, if it doesn't come from the lamb's nature, the very compassion and the very love that God has for those people that has been hurt, wounded, and been destroyed by the giant, then you do not have the authority to be a giant slayer.
But do you know how easy, going back to that boy, or how 99.9 of the teachers or evangelists in America would have said, lady, will you take your son out of this auditorium, please, and smile? Instead of, that's not what Jesus would have done. That child would have been able to start talking. And because you saw him the way Jesus saw him, he got healed.
Come on. Whoa.